Direct from Foxborough, Massachusetts, the gem of Norfolk County, and taped at the studios of Foxborough Cable Access. It's Foxborough Central. And here's your host, Bob Hickey.
And welcome to another fantastic episode of Foxborough Central. I am Bob Hickey, your host, and I thank you for taking the time to join with me and my guest as we talk about the people, events, and organizations that make Foxborough truly the gem of Norfolk County. Tonight, I am joined by a very special guest, our soon-to-be retiring and long-serving Police Chief Ed O'Leary.
Bob, thank you very much for having me here tonight.
Thank you for coming out. And for those of you who are fans of Foxborough Central, you know that Ed has been a frequent guest on our show for so many reasons, from his community work to policing issues to being involved with many of the charitable groups that work hand in hand to do so much of the good things that make Foxborough special. And it's one of those things where, you know, if I could just take a step back on a personal note, it's one of those things where you just come to take people for granted. It's never a good idea, right, to be taken for granted. We don't like it for spouses, we don't like it for friends, and we certainly don't like it when we're paid to do a job by our boss. And then how much more magnified is that when you think about a police officer, a firefighter, a public servant, because you invariably will get hit with, well, you're working for me, I pay your taxes. Well, that's a bunch of bunk, of course. But at the same time, we're all stakeholders and shareholders, and you know, it's testament to his skill not only as a police officer, as a law enforcement official, but also of the political side of it. When you're the police chief, you're responsible for employee relations, for managing your bosses who are volunteer selectmen. I used to be one myself, and I know how little I knew when I was voted in. So there's all these different pushes and pulls, and yet the one constant, if I may, and this is going to be the it for me talking tonight, by the way, folks, so just bear with me. The one constant is that Chief O'Leary is always with a certain equanimity and a certain poise and polish, and yet a sigh of, well, okay. And that's what I love about you, Chief, is that you always seem to have the right approach. And so I'm going to start off by saying this is our good chief's opportunity to just share. So let's consider this, if you will, friends, without a fireplace, of course, but a fireside chat. And we're just going to go long form and spend a little bit of time with Ed O'Leary. Ed, so thank you so much again for coming in. That was my preamble.
Opening.
And that, frankly, is going to lead me to just thanking you at the outset for all of your years of service. I've only been in Foxborough since 1993, so I haven't had as long to get to know you as perhaps many other of our viewers out there. But you've always been a constant, you've always been a constant in a positive way, and there's always so many different ways that things can go down, and you've always sort of had that professional approach of doing it right. So from a citizen standpoint, I've always been appreciative, and then in my time as selectman, I was always very appreciative also, and I know I probably did some things you didn't agree with, but you never really came out and said it, and that was always really nice and appreciated. So now that we're here, and after all these years of appearing on the program and doing the many different things, what I really would love to do is just get a chance to talk and let you share with the folks at home your thoughts, and maybe, I don't want to say get it all off your chest, but I do want to say now's a great time to just chat.
Well, I appreciate that offer, Bob. I can go way back with Foxborough Cable Access to when they had the studio up by what was the supermarket, and that building that was there. Behind what became Michelle's. And I can remember early on, someone had suggested trying to do a weekly news program. So for several months, I would go up on the particular night and try and provide some news stories, that happened in Foxborough. We were a very different community in 1985 and 86 than we are today. Both technology, rapid growth in our community, and a different business environment certainly have made some changes, as well as the social changes that we see today.
So many changes have happened, and you mentioned the beginnings of Foxborough Cable Access. Of course, you were here way before Foxborough Cable Access became a glimmer in anybody's eye, before the Cable Act was passed. And so you're here at the beginning. But and I won't make any jokes about competing with the Foxborough Reporter. Of course, you know, we're all good. We're all good friends everywhere in town. But, you know, you, having been a Foxborough person, you know, you've seen it all. And we're going to get to the media and the changes and what's going on now. Let's go back to the very beginning. How did you become interested in police work?
Actually, you know, having grown up here, my dad was the pro at Foxborough Country Club, and I helped out in his shop as well as learning to play golf, played on the golf team, and both at Foxborough High and then when I went to college. But again, Foxborough was more driven by the Foxborough Company as a major employer.
Sure.
Most of the people I went to school with, either their dad worked for the company itself, or if mom worked, she might be a nurse or a staff member over at the state hospital. That was very active in the time when I was growing up here in town.
You know, that's a great point. Now the public safety building sits where the nurses' dorm, I
That's
believe,
correct.
Used to be.
That's correct. And certainly that whole area has changed from a very vibrant hospital providing services to being closed down, left to decay on its own. And thankfully, at a key time period, we had that property developed where it's offering housing, various types of services, restaurants, as well as one of the best public safety buildings in our region in terms of the services that we can offer to the public there. So it has changed a great deal, yet I don't believe our core values as a community have changed. People are still nice to one another. We don't have a lot of people that would you consider them perhaps bad. They're people that make poor choices, absolutely. But in the long run, we don't have people that are dangerous to others for the most part. And I think that's an important element, that our community does care for one another, given the example of the various groups that we have in Foxborough that reach out to take care of others.
You know, we have come so far as the business aspect of the town, and you know, frankly, the town center shifting away from being supportive and occupied by workers from providing services to workers from the Foxborough Company, to now shifting up and down to the different malls, Fox Hill Plaza, the Bradley's Plaza. I know they're called something different now. Relax, everybody. And also Chestnut Green. But you know, you also raise a great point that we really haven't lost our flavor, our town, our feel still is Foxborough. And I'll go back to the 70s when I was coming up to visit my grandmother's from up here, so I come up as a kid, and I always had a certain feel about Foxborough, going down Cocasset River Park and going swimming, you know, visiting relatives at Lions Greenhouse, and so there's always a gentle peace about it. So you're absolutely right. It's got the same feel, but nothing ever stays the same. So how have we gotten to keep our same feel and yet still change everything from a support of those two businesses? Now, frankly, one's gone and the other one's completely different, to where we're at now. And you, having grown up here and had that long sense, but then you get into the role of police officer. That's a whole different kettle of fish.
Well, certainly crime has changed dramatically since I started with the department in '77. And you mentioned about the issue of how did I get into law enforcement. I was certainly, in my early college career, looking at issues such as demonstrations against the Vietnam War, very prevalent, the civil rights movement that was happening throughout the South and in major cities. And a good example is the Democratic National Convention in 1968, where it appeared that the police lost control and, you know, actually charged the demonstrators, creating, I think, bad feelings about law enforcement. And I started doing more reading as I was going through college about these different issues, and felt that it would be a career I'd really like to change or get into, and maybe have some changes and an ability to bring about let's say, peace on the streets, as it were.
Isn't that interesting? And even today, there's always that push-pull against, you know, doing the right thing and serving and protecting, and then people who may be perceived to be overstepping. And that was a driving force for you then,
Right.
back in '68.
Well, you know, in '68, I was just finishing up my senior year in high school and then going into college. But there were, as a result of different issues in our society, there were a tremendous amount of studies that were done about policing and different types of programs that they were trying to do to improve the quality of policing in the country. And as a result of that, I thought it would be a profession that would open tremendous opportunities for somebody that was willing to learn and change as society changed.
So you went to school. Where'd you go to school at?
I graduated over at Stonehill College,
Okay.
1973.
1973. And then with your degree in hand, you went into police work directly from college?
2 weeks later, I ended up initially, because of some problems in the Commonwealth with civil service, actually going out of state for 4 years.
Really?
I was a police officer in the city of Burlington, Vermont.
Okay.
I spent 4 years there in a variety of assignments, graduated from the police academy that fall, and was assigned to patrol division. And over time, when I finished my tenure there, I was an investigator in the juvenile division, working with families and delinquent children. So when my wife and I had an opportunity to come down to Foxborough, between my parents, her parents, and having the only grandchild, I think it was a done deal that if they offered me a job, I was coming. But I had a great start, and I appreciate Chief Gaudette for selecting me to be one of the patrolmen that was hired that year in 1977. And I was very fortunate during my time in working for Chief Gaudette of having somebody that was willing to make changes, willing to extend me latitude to do programs in the Foxborough schools that I thought were essential in terms of preventing crime and giving people better options about those decisions I talked about.
So, and I'll take a step back. Your wife, Claudia?
Yes.
And she's also from Foxborough?
No, actually, she grew up in Braintree. We met in college.
But Braintree is a lot closer to Foxborough than Burlington is.
Well, yes, it is.
There you go. So that's the pullback.
The pullback was definite from both sets of the grandparents as they were then.
Well, it was our gain then, and good for them for being strong with you,
Yes.
so that was good. So getting into police work and stuff, and then coming to Foxborough and stuff, you're skipping rather quickly over, how do you get promoted to detective, was it, in Burlington? At that early, that doesn't seem like a very slow career track. Seems like you very quickly ascended.
Because of some different cases that I had handled, I had some opportunities early to go in Burlington and do preventative programs. I had been a patrolman, had been slotted to go in there. I had a hiccup in my career when somebody resigned, and I got placed what I thought was going into the Juvenile Bureau a year earlier, and ended up spending another year in patrol.
Okay.
But that was a great opportunity, although I didn't think so at the time very clearly, because I was one of the first people selected as a field training officer. They were just bringing on the concept of field training, and so that when new officers got out of the academy, instead of being put directly on a foot beat or in a cruiser district, they'd ride with one of us for a month so that we could further refine what they had learned in the academy. For example, people now, when they finish the academy, we have them doing field training for a 3-month period or 12 weeks. Again, to bring up the skills that they've learned about and how they should be used in a practical manner. And I'm very fortunate. I've got a great crew of field training officers that have done a wonderful job from new people that are joining the ranks.
Isn't it so funny when we talk about current practices and how they seem so long established and mature? every practice had to start somewhere. And it's interesting to hear, and one of the nice things, and again, I'm speaking with Chief Ed O'Leary, Foxborough Police Department, who is nearing retirement, and he's sharing with us a lot of the gems that I would hate to miss. So again, thank you for doing this. The field training seems like such a common sense approach. I mean, who would go to a job without on-the-job training? And yet, you're saying that when people used to come out of the academy, they were just let right out.
Well, I guess something that would be even more shocking in this day and age, many people were hired and would work several months before actually being assigned to an academy. And we were doing it here in Foxborough for several years just because of the lack of academies and the need to put people out. One of the things that helped in that early phase was many of the officers had worked as special or reserve officers.
I was just going to ask you about that.
And they did have some baseline of training before they were out on the street.
But there wasn't a requirement, and that wasn't always the case.
No, there wasn't, and it's only in the 1990s that the state itself tightened up the regulations that somebody couldn't perform as a police officer without graduating from a regional or state police academy.
So folks, this might take just a little bit longer than half an hour, so I hope you'll bear with me, because you mentioned your work with youth and youth prevention and preventative action. And of course, one of the hallmarks, I believe, of your service is the strong partnership with the Foxborough Public Schools and ensuring that there are people in place, officers with special training and people who frankly care, who are in the schools to, offer that preventative services, to be the, what do you call them?
Our officer that works the school is called a youth crisis officer.
Youth crisis officer. And, but even going back, you mentioned this one of the initiatives that Chief Gaudet allowed you to do, and you mentioned being a youth officer up in Burlington. So, with the National Night Out Against Crime and Drugs, that is a partnership, and it's preventative. So it's always been sort of a guiding force of yours, or at least a goal of yours to introduce this, no?
Again, I was very lucky to have been exposed early in my career to some factors about prevention. And when I did come back to Foxborough, I actually had suggested to the chief about a program that I had done up in the city of Burlington. And he was anxious to have a program so that we could have a better relationship with the community, number one, but even with the young people in the community. So I was able to start in the late 1970s a program in the schools called the Officer Friendly Program. And that was a series in every single individual classroom to present different safety items, talking about different issues for each grade level, so that by the time 3 or 4 years had passed, we were covering from kindergarten to grade 5 in all of our public schools. And that was 3 visits per classroom per year. And so I had an opportunity to send a consistent message to almost a generation of Foxborough people. Great. In fact, people will still come up to me today, and especially if I'm not in uniform, and they'll look, and finally they'll say, "You're officer friendly," because they thought that was my name for most kids. But it was a good stepping stone. When I took over as the chief in '85, we sort of switched that. We were still doing a related version of that program, but also brought the DARE program to the middle school, which focused a more stringent curriculum about drug abuse and young teens making good decisions. And I was fortunate, Kurt Ludwig had taken over the role as a youth crisis officer here in Foxborough. He did the DARE program. Over time, I had other officers such as Bob Ford doing DARE, Tim O'Leary, that really got the idea of how important it was to work with young people in the school system in a preventative way. Now, Frank Azevedo is following that same role model, trying to do programs in the schools while at the same time handling juvenile court and other family matters, trying to help parents and children find common ground in some situations.
I cannot imagine a better officer than Frank Azevedo to be doing that.
No, he's a great person, good role model for young people.
Yes, absolutely. So the DARE program, that was not an established program back when it first started. That was a new concept. How did you get that involved in Foxborough, or how did you get that introduced to Foxborough? Was it difficult? Was it hard to get acceptance, or was it?
I was very fortunate because I had made established contacts deep within the school department. They knew that the programs that I had done had a good effect, and that anything that I was recommending that would be a positive option. I know that we were one of the first or second schools in the Commonwealth. I actually paid to have Kurt go out and actually train the trainer class out in California. I think there was only one representative from a police group other than Kurt in that session. And we were one of the first ones in our region to also implement the DARE program, because I thought it was essential, especially at that middle school age, where people are learning new things from their peers and pay less attention to their parents.
Don't know how that would ever happen, but you know, in Chief, you're being extremely, I'll say, humble, because it's not that you had good fortune, it's that you put so many years of hard work into the officer-friendly program, that you had established a solid foundation of success. And from that, you can, of course, build and do things. But if you're not willing to put that time in, I guess this is a message for all of us. If any of us are not willing to put that time in, then trust is harder to gain and success is harder to come by. So you obviously did so much work throughout the years doing that. So when the DARE program came along, it seemed, I'm sure, and I wasn't here at the time, but it must have seemed as if it was the next logical step. But how forward-thinking of you to grasp that and see that and have that vision and send Officer Ludwig out to get that train-the-trainer training when others in the Commonwealth hadn't even begun thinking about that yet. So a lot of work on your part.
Well, thank you.
Well, that generation thanks you as well, I'm sure. But then we keep going along. And it's not only youth services, but coming in as a patrol officer in 77?
Correct.
As a patrol officer in 77, and then you become chief in 85?
Right.
Just magic. 7 years in, you just become chief.
Well, there was a slight stop in between. In 83, I was promoted to sergeant.
Okay.
I was assigned the duties to run a shift of officers. I was very fortunate. Again, I worked with good people. The night relief job was a little hard. You would be working 2 midnight shifts and then 2 4 to 12s. Then I was fortunate that circumstances caused another sergeant to retire, so I took over the 4 to 12 shift. And I had a great team of officers that I worked with, Paul Shields, Paul Conant, Ed Wakovich, good people, Joe Strickland for a period of time, one of the more senior officers. And it was just a great team to work with. And again, the community was a little different because policemen were actually working the desk. You know, one of the 3 or 4 policemen on duty would work the desk. I tried to make sure that the patrolman had it rotated as previous commanders rotated them, so you're not stuck every night on the desk. But you had an opportunity to go out and have the different beats on a regular basis. But that was a great time. I had great opportunities for future learning. I had an opportunity to attend the Babson Police Command Institute, a 3-week program there. That was very helpful in putting myself in a position to compete for the chief's job.
I was going to say, again, laying foundation
Right.
and putting the work in. So now it's 1982 and you got the promotion?
83.
83, and you and Claudia now have how many kids?
We had 4 by that time.
By that time, and so I'm sure she was glad you were no longer on the overnight shift.
That's true.
But now working 4 to midnight, that's tough, because that's when things happen. They say nothing good happens after midnight, but it's everything that leads up to midnight that causes the bad things to happen. So what was Foxborough like back in that era, as far as what was a shift typically? What were your calls? What was going on?
It varies as it does to this day. You have motor vehicle crashes, you have domestic disturbances, you have noisy teenagers hanging out at a certain location, and it's just responding to each call in a unique fashion. Again, the good thing for many people still in that era, you get to know people, and very often that knowledge helps you manage their behavior. You know, by just saying the right things at the right time. It's not necessarily force or threatening force, because that doesn't always work. But it's just talking to people and them realizing who you are, and realizing, oh, if he's here, then it's really time to go.
One of the interesting things is the town of Foxborough, from a population standpoint, really hasn't changed that much in the time period. It seems as though it does, because you have different housing, but also you have different workforce and different housing. We no longer have the racetrack. We no longer have the workers. And so there's a whole different dynamic regarding what makes up our population. And essentially our population really hasn't changed much since the 70 census. So going to today from then, the shifts aren't necessarily due to a much bigger population. It's more due to the times and, you know, what are the issues. And so in your long career, how does then compare to now as far as a night patrol or what a police officer has to deal with?
There are fewer calls on the 12-to-8 shift. The reason being, in that era, the technology for burglar alarms was very shoddy, so you get more false alarms. We still offered services such as, you know, building checks in the center. It was very common for 4 in the morning for one of us to go around, check some doors, make sure there were no break-ins. The technology has improved so much that most everyone can afford to have burglar alarms both in their homes and or their businesses. So we don't get as many crimes, such as burglary, that are happening on the overnight shift as we did in the 70s and early 80s.
Interesting.
We are having much more of criminal activity when people are hit in their, not only their wallet, but via their computer, or falling for scams, such as the infamous IRS scam that people fell victim to back in 2015. And a lot of computer-driven crime is taking place, and that's why detectives like Tim O'Leary and Pat Morrison, I keep having them go to training classes about computer crime. So when our victims come in, we have some, not certainly solutions or automatic arrests of the offenders, but ways that we can enhance people protecting themselves better.
Interesting. So with the differences in the technology, that's one thing, but also I would think that, and again, this might just be a layman's interpretation, or at least my belief, it seems that there's a lot more prevalence of out-of-towners coming in, and particularly burglaries, people who don't live in our community coming into our community. Is that true, or am I reading the pages wrong in the Foxborough Reporter blotter?
No, actually, you know, a lot of the crime is committed by transients. We're in the midst of a tremendous opioid epidemic. People are more desperate than ever before. They're too well known in their own communities that, you know, police know who they are, and as a result, they're traveling far afield looking for homes or situations that they can try and gain access to a house quickly and then get away without being noticed. And although the burglary number has stayed pretty static at about 50 home burglaries a year or business break-ins, it's still a lot for a community because of the impact it has on a family, not just the property stolen, but that sense of insecurity going forward, that it can happen to me, it could happen again. And that's nerve-wracking. So we've been very fortunate with some of our cases that we've either been able to find who's committed the crimes through actions of other police agencies, or my detectives gaining information and sharing information with a regional group that we work in that leads to the solution of some of these burglaries.
So I want to get to that in a second, but also I think that Foxborough, one of the wonderful things about Foxborough is that we're halfway between Boston and Providence, and we also have Interstate 95, of course, predates you're coming back as a police officer, but 495 was a brand new road. And so you have that confluence of major arteries coming in addition to the 140 and the Route 1 and 106. So it seems that there's many ways for people to perhaps victimize the local population, but I'm thinking, and this is again just me, so I'm going to ask you the question, what is the difference, in your opinion, between the opioid epidemic now and perhaps the LSD and the heroin crashes that happened in the early 70s?
In the early 70s, we didn't have, or in the 70s itself, drug addicts weren't traveling that far afield. They were staying very local to where they were. There were very few people using heroin in the 70s because it was all injection. And I think people in the suburbs had a phobia, so to speak, about injecting drugs. Now that didn't stop the cocaine snow wars of the 80s, where we had quite a few people using and abusing cocaine in this community and building cases on them. But it wasn't until this latest round that started, I'm going to say back in the late 90s, and it was actually triggered more in the South Boston area initially, when you had people having overdose deaths there. In fact, Bill Keating was ahead of his time. He brought in a group to talk to his crime control council, and I was there for that presentation.
And back then he was district attorney.
He was the district attorney prior to moving on to a different role in government as a legislator at the federal level. But he brought the people in from South Boston, and they all had the same story. Many of the people in the community started snorting cocaine first to get the high and the release. But within 18 months of snorting it, they're ending up on the needle. And then they can't control how much they're taking as the dosage, and that's when they overdose. Just recently, to bring us fast forward, we've got a subcommittee here in town. We're right now going under an opioid task force, but I think you'll be seeing items calling it Safe Foxborough, which is a continuation of a program that we were doing 4 years ago. Only now the opioid issue, where we do have overdose cases here in town, and the officers and the fire service personnel are using Narcan to help people recover. But more importantly now, Governor Baker just signed into law that people that are under the influence of drugs can be taken into protective custody and even against their will be brought to a treatment center, being a hospital. Because Narcan is not a cure. Narcan is a quick fix to save someone's life. And even then, they come back, they're acting normal, they can have an immediate relapse. So that's why it's important to make sure that they're monitored in a medical sense.
Now, see, that is a very interesting approach, and one, by the way, that I applaud, but one that shows the severity of the problem, because anytime you, quote unquote, take somebody's rights away, that means that's a massive step. And for that to become state law, that demonstrates front and center that this is a serious epidemic, and there's still a lot of answers that haven't been found yet. And so involuntary safekeeping is, and America's a great country and we respect rights, so that's a last ditch effort. And so many other issues happen where you say, well, how come somebody doesn't do something? Well, it's because we're not allowed to, but in this case, it's interesting that it's such a prevalent issue that emergency measure is being implemented. But to get back to where we were then to where we are now, it's just so much scarier in that it can just instantly kill, because there's now things that you mix in, and there's it seems as though the people, not kids, but people are ingesting drugs that they don't really know what they're ingesting, and that's the scariest thing.
Well, I think we've seen a couple of major cases where you've had numerous overdose deaths caused by additives to the heroin, such as fentanyl. And I know that there was some recent discussion within my profession about having that as a separate crime. Just recently, through my own reading, people in West Virginia and the Ohio area have been inundated with animal tranquilizers that are even more powerful than fentanyl, and it found that 1 out of 10 people that use it have ended up dead.
1 out of 10.
1 out of 10. So they captured an individual with, I think the amount was in excess of 35 pounds that he was bringing back from Africa. And when you consider the dosages, he could have spread almost 100,000 doses of this drug that 1 out of 10 that uses it ends up dead.
That's an amazing number. If you think about that statistic, that's an amazing number.
It is.
And we're not completely immune to that. It's not going to stay in West Virginia or Ohio. Through education, of course, you try. And through policing efforts, you try. But just scary.
No, it is. And that's why it's not just the police or public health or the school system. It's a community issue that we all have to take note of and be able to do something about.
I'm here with Chief Ed O'Leary, who is graciously spending some extended time with us. So thank you very much for joining us here in Foxborough Central, and thank you, Chief. So the recurring theme as we talk about your life and career here as our Chief Law Enforcement Officer, it goes back to youth services and introducing forward-thinking approaches to how to deal with and educate the youth. So let's go back a bit to 1985, and we are thinking we want to be chief, and Chief Gaudette is getting ready to retire.
Actually, the chief had announced that he was going to be retiring, and unfortunately, he had called for an exam. We had had the exam, I think it was the first weekend in February. There were 4 candidates. And unfortunately, the following week, he had a heart attack and crashed the automobile he was in. So that left a void. Pete Tebow, who was a senior sergeant at the time, took over the role as the interim chief. And then when the results were out, I had scored #1 on the examination. And as a result, after meeting with the selectmen, I was the one that was selected.
Okay, then. So now you have become the chief of police in 1985. Yes. A young pup of only 7 years on the force in Foxborough, 8 years on the force in Foxborough. And what were some of the immediate challenges? It's always exciting, fun, and a little scary taking on any new job.
Right.
When you're the #1 cop in the land.
I wouldn't go so far as to say that, Bob. In fact, I think people were probably having second thoughts about that, because within the first 6 months that I was here, we had, I think it was Hurricane Gloria, that knocked out power for the town for well over a week. We also had the first 2 homicides that had taken place in years here in our community. Okay. One on Cocasset Street in October of that year, and less than 3 weeks later we had one over on Oak Street. So I mean, I think people were a little shaken by, murder in Foxborough, because it's something that's extremely rare.
Right.
And then to sort of top things off, I also had 3 senior officers retire before December. Which meant that I was scrambling to fill vacancies, at the same time provide services to the community. So the first 6 months were certainly a baptism of fire.
I was going to say, it was a baptism under fire, but one of the nice things about time is that it gives you a little perspective. And so looking back in those first 6 months, would you say it was actually a great opportunity to establish yourself?
Extremely good opportunity.
Or did you almost put the key in the car and pack up a U-Haul and
actually
head back to
no,
Burlington?
because it was so challenging, to have to juggle different circumstances on a regular basis. And at the same time, the football season had started. The Patriots, for whatever reason, that particular season, they did play better it helped with a little bit with the crowd behavior. Although it was still frightening to think of all those buses when they're playing the Bills that have driven down from 3 in the morning and them emptying out empty kegs of beer in the parking lots that they've been drinking since they got here. And our role at the stadium was much more constrained to the facility itself rather than engaging people out in the parking lot.
I really want to talk about that because that is such a big piece of who we, Foxborough, identify ourselves with. It hasn't always been, you know, are we going to the Super Bowl? There's a, you know, we can all look up on Google about people taking the field goal post down and getting electrocuted out on Route 1 and punching a state police horse. And there's many
episodes, yes.
Episodes, I like your terminology, episodes that I'd like to just chat on. So sure. Let's actually get to that. So back in '85 when you came aboard, the Foxborough company was winding down as far as being the major employer. We had a downtown area that was changing a bit.
Yeah.
We had some businesses moving out. We had some vacancies, but we also had an abandoned state hospital. So we had a significant employer just completely gone, and that closed in what, 78, 79?
It closed for a period of time.
And I know the Dexter building was still open
That was
because
still
that was
open,
functional from the Rentham State School.
But it had closed, then it reopened for a period of time that they moved patients back here while they renovated Rentham. Mm-hmm. And then when they closed, they just walked away. And when I say walked away, I mean left doors unlocked, left glass windows unboarded up, and it wasn't until about 1993 that they finally came back to do something about securing those buildings.
And even then, I remember, and I was a member of the Foxborough JCs, and we did our haunted house up there, which I'm sure evokes some wonderful memories. But a lot of the props we used were because when they left, they simply left, and they left all the records, and they left everything. You cannot imagine in today's age of identity protection and HIPAA regulations the condition that this was left in. So I can well imagine with leaving the doors open, there was also a situation where you had a certain number of people that were perhaps without community services, and that was a challenge also, I'm sure, for the police department.
Well, in terms of community services, we're very fortunate that we still had, and this is an era before we had a combined senior center and Foxborough Human Services.
Yep.
Foxborough Human Services was a separate operating entity. They actually had their building and their office space in what had been the superintendent's house.
Right, I remember that. Absolutely.
And as a result, they would provide services. They had a part-time social worker even back in that era, because in my role as chief, that was one of the first committees that I took part in, as my predecessor had. Mm-hmm. And Foxborough Human Services was an outgrowth from the 70s of the Foxborough Drug Council, when drugs in the late 60s, early 70s were becoming more and more of a problem. But yes, they would try to provide services. In fact, when they closed that building down, I was fortunate enough to get Inventus to let us have what had been the retirement building, the old white building next to the cafeteria. So Foxborough Human Services was in there for well over a decade until they were joined forces.
So they were merged with the senior, right? And then the food pantry is still there, no?
Food pantry is still there.
So it's that building.
As well as the local police academy.
Really?
So I can fill you in on that maybe during the second half of the show.
There we go, there we go. Of course, I'm here with Chief O'Leary, who is sharing a treasure trove of institutional knowledge that I'm afraid we're going to lose. So I'm glad we're able to capture at least a small piece of it here on tape so we can share it here with our friends on Foxborough Cable Access. With the introduction of different technologies and different policing approaches, how were you able to get everybody to go in the same direction? This is a management question. and one that's probably going to be a lesson for all of us, because we see as an example today, and this is 2016 for those of you who are watching this at a later date, the Boston Police Department doesn't want to voluntarily wear cameras, body cameras, and so that is probably a piece that had it been approached differently would have been negotiated in and discussed ahead of time, as opposed to being a reaction. Now that's Boston. Here in Foxborough, it's always been rather interesting, the dynamic as you introduce new things and get buy-in from the people who are actually implementing and putting their lives out there and doing the hard work in a community that may not really understand why something is going on. And then, of course, the offenders who don't want anything to happen because they want to get away with whatever they're getting away with. How have you just approached that? And I'm not asking about anything in particular. I'm just kind of curious. What are your thoughts?
Well, a lot of it has to do with the fact that size does matter, in that I have daily contact with every member of the force in some fashion or another, whether it was convincing them that civilian dispatching was a way to go. We had tried it in the late 80s. It had worked. However, the financial collapse in 1990 ended up with losing those personnel and putting police officers back on the desk. Okay. I think dollar for dollar, we train police officers a tremendous amount of time so they can provide direct services to residents out in the community. And a different skill set is needed behind the desk to coordinate radio and different computer traffic and database management. So I felt that by working with the police union, talking with them ahead of time, we were able to come to an agreement that allowed us to hire back civilian dispatchers through the grant funding I was able to get through the community policing grants that were offered during the 1990s. In fact, we created additional staff members, again, through grants that we received during that time frame. So we were able to build up the staff of officers and have them more directly involved with people in the community, and developed a corps of civilian dispatchers that could do the job back of house. I don't envy Commissioner Evans having 2,300 people, uniformed people, and then having almost 600 or 700 civilian employees. He has a mighty task to try and accomplish, where on the local level, although now the department has 35 officer positions, we have 9 civilian dispatchers and 2 additional civilian staff.
If I look at the population, I think it's about exactly the same ratio.
Right.
Yeah, my simple math. But, you know, a lot of credit also goes towards, you know, forward thinking and anticipating the future and looking at trends and being prepared for the next play. And so you seem to have done that over the years. What are some of the, I know you're being very humble here, and while I always enjoyed that piece of it, I want you to put on your brag hat for a little bit, and let's talk about maybe one thing that you really, you know, I did this, I brought this to town, and I can see now results. What is that one thing that you really kind of could say, yeah, you know what, I like that? And it may not even be a me thing, but more it's something that at the time I was in a position, to use your terms, I was lucky enough to be in a position to be able to introduce this, and I had great people helping me. So we'll put that preamble in, and then what was it?
Certainly the hunt for the public safety building was a challenge.
That was a challenge.
We initiated work on it in 1986. I think we looked at 10 different sites, 3 of them in great depth, to the point we were ready to have plans drawn. And at every turn, there was always some wrinkle, whether it was the timing in the economy, other people that had their own agendas to thwart a police station as such, and then even trying to get funding for a public safety building. We were very fortunate in 2006. The building committee had an idea. We were able to get land from the state.
We were able to get those 4 parcels, one for the public safety building. Yes,
for Chestnut Green and that development, which has, I think, been a great economic engine, both for the small businesses that have gone in there, but more important, the housing development that is in there has also helped.
And also the recreation complex as
Right,
it's grown up around them, because back then it was just
phenomenal.
woods and an abandoned state hospital,
Right.
and so it had to have that vision.
So I mean, that having those things grow up, I think was really the effort by a lot of people. And again, I was fortunate. I had people on staff, and I'll use one example, Al Haskell. Alan's always been a very detailed guy, and I was able to leave a lot of the issues because he was so focused on details. I think across the board, the guys would tell you, I'm not so good on small details. You know, and I am lucky that I have talented people I work with that pick up that factor.
Well, it's important to put people around you.
Absolutely.
I always say surround yourself with great people so I can stay at 10,000 feet and make sure we're going in the right direction.
I mean, that's the one thing that I've always been fortunate with. There are people in place at the right times, so the department has been able to move steady but constant progress.
So that new public safety building, the 2006 opening, but that building, that was a lot of, I'll say, political work that had to be done. There were some very poor conditions in the basement, and for those of you who don't remember at home, I became a selectman in 2002, so I was elected into the heavy piece of it. I mean, it was coming to a head. There was no longer a tenable situation downstairs. It was a situation where it was cramped. The cells weren't just working. You had people in a garage holding cell area. It was a mess. And so you had a lot of work to do. Also, it was a safety issue. It wasn't the most pleasant environment downstairs.
No, it wasn't. We had had several prior initiatives. In fact, right after I had become chief, we actually built out the station a little bit to pick up some office area that planning had used off and on till they moved to the Lewis School. I took over that area, so we had a roll call area as well as an office for an executive office and better room for the detectives.
But it was so cramped down there.
It was cramped.
And it wasn't safe bringing the prisoners in.
Well, safety of prisoners does have to concern anybody here in Foxborough because we're liable for that prisoner.
I was thinking more for the officers bringing the prisoners in because it wasn't space. It was
right. It was cramped. The toilets flushed occasionally, and the cell block area needed constant care. The air quality was horrendous. And at some point, we actually made an addition. We closed the range, removed all the apparatus there, and built a couple of additional offices as well as the locker room for the officers, and then had to build a separate locker space for the female officer that we took on.
Yeah.
So it was really cramped quarters, and although our flood wasn't big enough that Bill's
canoe
rowboat could float down the hall, the year before we moved into the station, we had a July storm that the bottom floor flooded.
Yep.
It damaged our radio system, which meant that we ended up having to take action on the radio system before we moved into the new building to get all the radios up and running again.
And of course, he's referring to Bill Cusper's famous,
right,
our building commissioner's canoe at the selectmen's meeting. that was classic. But it really brought to a head the conditions, and that was post-move, but
correct.
The conditions that were there. So with the work that was done and the presentations at town meeting and getting the buy-in, getting the location, design work, and Bill Yukna and the Permanent Municipal Building Committee, their hard work on getting everything together, and then the funding project, and we sold a parcel of land to help offset costs. There was a whole lot of different wheels that had to all move in conjunction. So that was a big accomplishment. So that's up there, huh?
Well, it has to be because it's a building that we built for 50 years.
Yeah.
We had expandability in mind when the structure was put up. We still have offices we put in that I didn't think I would need, but I know at some point in the future people will have tasks to do in them.
Yeah, again, that's that forward-looking thing, because also you had worked to have the capability of a regional dispatch system, even though there wasn't one on the books or legislated
Correct.
or even in play. And I want to go back to the regional approach in a second here. But
Okay.
so forward thinking, if that does come down the pike, and of course we read today in the Foxborough Reporter that this is an ongoing effort of regionalization and perhaps a regional dispatch. And so Foxborough, if it happens and if it comes to Foxborough, we're already set up for it.
Well,
to a certain degree.
To a certain degree, and if you want, I can sort of go into that because
I would love to.
Individually, I don't think towns can continue to do business as they've always have in terms of policing as well as for the fire service. We've been doing a lot of regional approaches going back to when I first made chief, when we created out of the Rentham Court District a regional drug unit to investigate drug crimes and to have more investigators' efforts as a combined group to try and curb some of the drug use in that time frame. We also developed in early 2000 the Metropolitan Law Enforcement Council, which originated based on Norfolk County's efforts so that we could create a different set of specialty groups that would be able to respond to any community in the county. And since then, it's grown from county-wide to now including well over 50 communities in several counties. And the teams go out on a regular basis when other communities are having issues.
And I saw that one night after a Patriots Super Bowl. There was an issue on the Common, and it seemed like it was only 2 minutes later. There was everybody was coming in, and you called in the cavalry, so to speak.
Well,
and you kept an issue that was potentially pretty ugly from becoming that way. And,
right. I mean, that's why we have to do things on the regional basis. We all contribute. I have staff members that go to the trainings on a regular basis and go on the call-outs, but it's too hard for each community to run its own operation. We have a computer crime division, so that when the detective sees computer-related evidence or phones, we have a group that's just working on those technological issues to gather evidence.
That's pretty.
So I mean, it's a wide-ranging group. We have in the investigative division, we have a CART team, which is a child abduction response team that is certified on the national level. So if one of us has one of those tragedies in which a child is abducted, we're going to have 30 first-rate investigators that can blanket the community to gather evidence and hopefully bring about a great resolution, which is the return of the child unharmed.
Yeah, and you had mentioned that it's a changing thought of each individual community just staying within itself, because there's no way you could have that type of response with resources in any one community, particularly Foxborough with a total police force of 35, you say?
Correct.
So that's an ongoing, continuing challenge that might be, even for the next police chief, something that's going to continue to become more regionalized, perhaps?
I think you'll see different services. I don't think my profession's at the point in Massachusetts that you will literally regionalize a police force.
Because it's still community-based. It's still...
And I think New England, it's strongly attached to its own community identity. I know that they've had more success with it in the Midwest, Western Pennsylvania. I know as far back when I went to the FBI Academy that they had started doing it there because of the cost and the collapse of the coal and steel industry back in the 1990s. So.
Well, here in Foxborough, we love our knowing who our police officers are and knowing that when we call on services, we're going to know. But I suppose it's also a benefit of, or just perhaps a benefit's probably the wrong word, but if you're locally based, you tend to treat each other a little bit better just because you're still going to soccer, and my kids are still playing soccer with your kids and that sort of thing. So you do know who you're working with.
I've tried to make it something that I actively attempt. I really think it's important for people to have a stake in our community, whether they've moved here and have their kids in the school system, whether they were brought up here, because I find that's really essential in the officer to know that, people know who you are. I'm very much against this so-called stranger policing. We only deal with felonies or misdemeanors because that's not policing. That's about 6% of the types of calls we get. It's helping people as a large proportion. And I think that if people know who you are and you treat people reasonably, you're not going to have a negative reaction. And that even goes when you arrest people. If they're treated with dignity and you don't have people, fighting with you, and you should be able to talk most people, not all,
most people,
into doing what has to be done.
So now we're going to talk about, on the flip side, we're local, but every so often up on Route 1, we get an influx of 68,000 fans. So we essentially quadruple the size of our town, and in so doing, maybe not everybody knows everybody up there.
Well, that's a whole different methodology of policing, because you're dealing with a different crowd. And when you have people coming together in a crowd, they behave differently as they would in front of their house, at the local market, where people do know them. It's made worse by alcohol consumption, excessive alcohol consumption in some cases. And you have to be able to present a positive image. I don't want stormtroopers as such lining up, because that would inflame the crowd into acting out against what you're trying to do. But have a strong visible presence, be able to talk to people clearly of what your expectations are, and usually manage the behavior by asking them, could you help us out here? We're trying to get this done. And even people that can appear belligerent very often will follow the direction because they're given a little bit of a choice in the matter.
Now, going back to your first day as chief, or even going back to when you first became a patrolman up here, Schaefer Stadium, then Foxborough Stadium, was a $6 million building that housed the team, but the team wasn't all that good, and back then the reputation was significantly different than what the reputation is now. And so you've been in charge of public safety up there from those days, and what a change from the days when it was Billy Sullivan's team going through the Victor Kayem year or two, to the James Orthwaite year or two, to the Bob Kraft years. But I remember when the stadium was first opened in 2002.
Right.
And I was first elected as selectman then, so I was, in a very small way, part of just observing and seeing what was going on. What a phenomenal use of technology, but it's a different attitude also. And how have the attitudes towards the partnership between the town and the stadium and the use of technology changed from then to now? We could do an entire program on just technology and how you deal with crowd control. But I've always been rather impressed with all the different moving parts, and yet the numbers over the years have continued to go down. In fact, we now have concerts up there with under 10 arrests, and we now have soccer matches where you have fewer than that. And it's just, what a difference, what a change, what a positive change.
Well, a lot of it has to do with the cooperation with stadium security. You talk about the technology. They have a tremendous amount of camera views so that we can spot trouble ahead of time, disturbances, and an immediate reaction, both either from security itself or from my staff members, that very often a caution to the people involved is sufficient to have them settle down a little bit and watch the event or the game. Much like some situations, though, as much as you can try and control it, a lot of it is, again, driven by alcohol, which lessens judgment and inhibitions. But overall, we've seen some better numbers. I'm not predicting a total victory with this coming weekend with Kenny Chesney in town, but at the same time, I think that my staff has become more resilient and also thinking about alternative methodologies of handling those people that could be disruptive. And the thing to remember, Bob, for a major stadium event, we might have up to 12 or 15 of our regular officers on duty there, probably about 20 of our town reserve officers on duty, but I have 120 officers from 18 different towns and 3 different counties. And trying to mesh all those pieces together in a cohesive group is the challenge that we go through every event, because we have no control over who's coming. It's not like I have the big draft day table and I say, I want this guy, that guy, and this guy, but don't send me him.
We're going to keep the buses from Buffalo out.
Yes, but in terms of staff, but we've been very fortunate. We give solid briefings, we give law updates to the staff that are there. All the communities that join us, for the most part, have allowed us to install our stadium frequency into their own radios that most officers take home with them now. So it's easier to get a hold of people when incidents do occur and have them respond promptly. And I think the officers that work frequently have developed relationships with those security officers that are in a particular district that they cover. And I think that's helpful, that security knows that the officers are there to assist them, and we can get the security to do certain things that will enhance the relationship with the fans and with the officers.
So what you're saying is that a lot of hard work has gone into this, and the task is never done. You should always be vigilant.
It's something, given what we see happening in Europe at different places here in our country, with random violence, in some cases terrorist-sponsored. It's a great concern of mine, because we do have something that might be perceived as a huge target for those that are disaffected and want to cause some type of outrage.
We are one of only 30 facilities, and on any given Sunday, we're in the national spotlight.
That's correct. And when more than national at times, international, given the fact that we've had several international soccer games here, and we have media from across the world going to those games. And the NFL itself is a marketing marvel of having things across the world, having games shown.
I'm not going to make any Roger Goodell jokes here, so we'll just move on from there. So I'm here with Chief Ed O'Leary, and he's been gracious enough to spend an extended period of time with us tonight. I only have one more question, then I'm going to ask you to just kind of go freeform. So from where we are in 1985, when you took over as chief, to where we are today in 2006, as you prepare to wrap it up and hand off the baton, what are some of the takeaways? What are some of the things that maybe need to still be done that you've been working on, but more needs to go? And I suppose we can always start off with the opioid epidemic, because it's certainly not at the making, but as far as drugs go, it gets scarier and scarier and scarier, and I don't know where it ends or how you combat it.
I think we have to have more education and information going out to families in the community. We're working on that. We've got a program scheduled for September with the school system. They have their athletes night, which parents and children have to go to it. It's a good way to have a captive audience, because if you just try and ask people to come, they're too busy in the lives that we have in Foxborough. So I think that is going to be an ongoing effort, and change opioid to some other drug a decade from now, and you'll still have issues with drug abuse.
And that's the scariest thing, is that there's always going to be something, some challenge, some temptation.
I'll give you a good example. We had our cocaine binges through the 80s. A lot of communities in the Midwest had a meth problem through the late 90s into the 2000s. So it's an ongoing issue, different drugs coming up in our society that lead people to make extremely poor decisions and put themselves and others at risk. I think we have to have more dialogue with people that are different than us in our society. Certainly what we've seen in the inner cities, there's a great number of people that are disenfranchised or believe they are disenfranchised for what's happening. I think we're going to see a continuing effort from my profession to do that in an organized manner. And I think for our community, we just have to see where our growth will take us in the future, and to position the police department. We're on track right now, but what changes are going to happen both along Route 1, within housing in our community, that might cause us to have to rethink the trajectory and adapt to the new conditions. And I think that's a keynote. You have to be adaptable and flexible with a lot of different issues that come before us.
Impressive. As far as what your understanding of the issue is, and you're absolutely right that there's always going to be something, but it's got to be forward thinking. Right. So, Chief, you have, and I know this because I saw you walk in with it, that little black book of yours. Tell me what that is.
That's my journal. I started keeping it when I became a sergeant. Different things that have happened in the community, different things I want to remind myself when we have a concert coming in, and go back and
really see
what the past was, so we don't have it.
I don't want to know what's written in there about me.
Well, let me look. I think there's a chapter. I don't know whether.
But that is impressive, and that shows that you really put a lot of, again, the foundation, the work that goes into researching and understanding and not forgetting what we've done, because that's the biggest sin, is that we do something and then we have to repeat the same mistakes over again. So what in that journal really stands out? What are some of the, I don't want to say highlights because that's the wrong word, but what are some of the things that maybe on a positive and a negative really resonate as far as, wow, this has been a career?
I've been very fortunate, Bob. I mean, I'm grateful to live in a community like Foxborough, that I've had an opportunity to have a great career here with nice people. I'm very fortunate in the staff that I've worked with. The people that I work for coming through the department, sergeants like Paul Jones, stick out directly. I worked for him for many years on the midnight shift. John Gaudette gave me a tremendous amount of opportunity to grow in doing programs, seeing the inside operation of a police department, and other chiefs from the area. When I first became a chief, gave me great guidance. Walter Sandland, a good example over in Plainville, of somebody that spent time, and I have somebody as a resource to talk problems through with him. So again, I consider myself a lucky person.
There you go. Well, we've been very lucky to have you as our chief.
Well, thank you.
And you've certainly given of yourself and your time, and so you and Claudia are getting ready to maybe go on a one-day vacation, and then...
Well, I would think a vacation at some point. I think in the time that I've been chief, I've only had 1 2-week vacation, just because of the activity.
So maybe you're due.
So I think I'll take 2 weeks in a row once I get past September 30th.
Chief Ed O'Leary has been so gracious to spend these last a little bit more than an hour with us, but frankly, these last 31 years as our police chief, and these last, gosh, if we do the math, it's 39 years as a public safety officer in some capacity for the good people of Foxborough. Chief, you get the final word as always.
Well, I'd like to thank Foxborough for giving me a great opportunity, and thank Cablevision from its early inception of giving a view for our residents of the police department.
Well, and we'd like to thank our viewers for really supporting us here in Foxborough Central, making this program possible, because without it we wouldn't have been able to spend the last hour plus with Chief O'Leary and really digging a little deeper than what we normally can in a short form program. So Chief, thank you so much.
Bob, thank
not
you
only
for
for
the opportunity.
being our police chief, but also for being a friend to Cable and a friend to me. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And folks, I hope you have had a wonderful time spending the last little bit with Chief Ed O'Leary and myself. Until next time, I wish you a wonderful day, Foxborough. Take care.